My name is Tom Emerson. I run a movement studio here in Canberra called Praksis, and we're in the studio now, which is shut down because of the coronavirus outbreak. And this is Soisci.
Hi, I'm Soisci, and I teach here with Tom, except now we've gone online.
Yeah, and we just thought we would have a conversation and talk a little bit about what's going on in the world and how we're responding to it and our general reflections on this kind of weird, crazy situation we find ourselves in at the moment. So what would you say, Soisci, was your reaction, or when did you start taking what's happening more seriously?
Well, I spent the last 10 years in Hong Kong, so I still have a lot of close friends and relatives there. So I was kind of sort of in the loop quite early on as all this stuff was happening. But it wasn't clear if it would really spread globally in the way it has been. And I'm also half Italian, so that's another area that got hit very hard and quite early on. So I think when I saw what was happening in Italy and in other countries, I understood that this is not something anyone will really escape. Some will cope better than others. And I became more personally concerned when I saw the levels of complacency and panic that were there simultaneously, with very few people fitting in a grounded, informed, balanced state in the middle. And yeah, that's why, you see it at home, like before the virus really arrived, like it just started to enter, or at least be exposed through our very limited amount of tests in this country. You would see that in the supermarkets, on the media. So that's creating this frenzy. So I suppose that for me personally, and I'm not sure if it's similar for you, but when the first case came to Canberra, it was like no longer being informed or sharing ideas, but immediately taking action. That was the switch for me.
Yeah, I think it was similar for me, and I observed even in myself the same kind of tendency when the bushfires were coming as well, because all these sorts of things start out as like almost a spectacle, right? Where, okay, there are thousands of cases in China, and if I think about 1,000 people, that's a lot if I try to really think about it. But normally you just hear the number and you go, okay, there's this thing happening, and far away, it's not immediate, and it's, even if you try very hard to empathize with just large numbers of people being affected by something that's not directly in your vicinity. And so I think that tendency to be complacent is normal because it's easy, right? Like, you don't have to use any energy. You just go, that's not my problem. I'll wait for it to arrive. And in some sense, actually, that's true to begin with, because you can't just lock the doors straight away and you don't know what the extent of the problem's going to be. So that's totally understandable. But then, yeah, I guess when it came to Canberra and it was obvious, like, this is going to be a problem that we have to confront, I definitely had kind of an afternoon, not of panic, but of like anxiety around, I mean, it's like whenever your plans change, right? then the plan that you had for the future or your expectations for the future change, and this anxiety comes up. And that's your body's way of prompting you to act, right? Even in a simple sense, like, oh no, the audio's off. Actually, no, it's on. The audio's off, you get like that little bit of anxious energy, and then that's your body's way to tell you, okay, I have to check the audio and make sure it's on. And so I had that, and then had a poor night's sleep and woke up the next morning and started like planning what would I actually do to respond. And even just by starting to have some sort of plan, which in the beginning, what we were doing in the studio, just washing hands more and disinfecting things and practicing social distancing in class was enough for me to feel better to begin with. And so I've just tried to kind of do that at every step along the way, like amend the plan based on the information that's coming in. and that's helping. But it's not. Like, it's helping me, but is it actually helping? I don't know. What do you think about that? Like, what to actually do?
That's exactly kind of what's been on my mind the most, is what I can do, because that's all that I can do.
Right.
I can't go outside and change, like, not even you, for example. Like, we communicate, we're friends, we work together, but ultimately I can only be in charge of operating this Soisci, right, on every level. It's just a very amplified, sped up journey, right? Because actually things like change, they're inevitable, and our plans are they're there to steer us towards, like, on our path, which is very important, but they will always kind of take shape in a way that they need to, and sometimes they are not what we want or something that we can understand. And when that shaking up happens, you start to question, right? And things initially, like fear or doubt, can creep up, but then you start to dig further down the rabbit hole and say, like, what is this exposing to me? So, like, I personally don't follow a ton of news or politics, or even on social media. I'm quite selective, where I'll go on and off, and I would read not necessarily things related to current affairs all the time. So, like, a lot of my friends will know, like, oh, she's a bit in an island, in a bubble, and they'll very kindly inform me, like, do you know this is happening? Like,
Right.
okay, thank you.
Right.
It's actually useful. But I have always been this way by nature, but it's also a conscious choice, because I feel that most things we ingest are mainly negative and rarely useful. And it's like you said initially, when you heard about the virus in a place called Wuhan, and it was, a really extremely tragic event, right? But you also maybe hear about something happening in Somalia, and another thing in the Philippines, and somewhere else. So all of it kind of gets filtered out, because you can only take action for things that are immediately connected to you, where you can be involved. I would feel that when I read news or hear news, I would feel sorrow or sadness or frustration, and I would realize that there's actually nothing I can really do. There's few cases where you can actively contribute to helping the situation. And I'll do my little part, like, donate money or sign petitions, or in person help friends and be involved with community. But something that's really far, again, you can't, like, relate so much.
Right.
But I found that with this virus, it switched, and I became, I think, like most human beings, addicted to reading information, because you're threatened, and you're like, okay, so what are the scientists saying? What's our politicians saying? What's the public to do? What am I to do? And, like, how does it work? And I noticed it became, it didn't last very long at all, but it became like an addiction. And even when I caught myself, I was like, okay, I think I have enough information, which is limited, because even doctors and scientists don't fully understand what's happening. There is nothing more I can add, so I will back off and take my steps of action.
Right.
But they don't stop, because all your friends and relatives and colleagues, like, keep sending this through. So it really pulled me to inward more, and I started to think, well, what can I do? And the first obvious thing for me was social distancing, and as much as possible, self-isolation. That became very important for me. Everyone is at risk. You can be young and healthy and still have severe symptoms, although that's rare, right? but I'm more concerned for others, and I live with different people, older people, and yeah, it's just I have to be in charge of myself right now. So that's on the physical level, and following all the protocols, like we have been washing hands, sterilizing everything, wearing a mask in crowded or busier places if I need to go out. But that's just like the entry level. Kind of like when we start a meditation, we start with a body scan. It starts with the most obvious, biggest, most gross external parts, and then moving down the layers. So next I started to think about, well, okay, so I don't just want to avoid the virus, I want to enhance myself to deal emotionally, mentally, physically with this. So immune boosting practices, which include like nutrition and herbal supplements and physical practices that we do, and maybe you can share a bit about as well. And connecting with community is another big part, because we need each other. And I'm sure you have some things you want to share regarding, being interconnected or isolated. And then the next layer after that, which would be maybe the most important, would be my spiritual practice, because everything is changing whether there's a virus or not. The body is decaying as we speak, and our relationships and stories and ideas, they all change. So what is giving me that center, that unchanging solid core, is when I connect with it by moving away from all this external chatter. It doesn't pollute that. That's like it's not just a purification, it's like a knowing, a grounded, that whatever happens, I know I'm okay. And it's not just a comforting idea, I feel it in my system, in my core. So that's been my long-winded, condensed journey that's been so far, really.
Yeah, I had a really similar for me, like when I started getting more and more concerned, was when I found out that you could be asymptomatic and already be contagious. Because before it's the same sort of thing. I was like, well, if I get a little bit sick, then I'll self-isolate and I'll probably be fine, because I normally kick colds pretty quickly and don't catch as many as perhaps other people, because of all the sorts of practices that we're doing and things we're already paying attention to. But then I was like, oh my God, I could get sick and pass it on to someone and not know that was happening. And so immediately, like you spoke almost about things that start really external and then become more and more internal. And for me, that was that like actually is shooting out from my just worry about myself. Will I be sick? Like immediately the sphere of concern went a little bit broader to making sure that the people that I'm coming into contact with don't get sick because of me, or doing whatever I can to stop that from happening. But then also, like we're running a group here, like we have a group of people here, and we're at the center of that community as well. And I didn't want to close down and then not provide anything for those people who would obviously benefit from what we would normally do. And I think that community aspect, like it's such a novel situation, it's a weird challenge where we can't really group together. We literally, like the whole point is that we have to stay apart.
Physically, yes.
Physically, and if we all stay apart, then the problem will go away with time. And for me, seeing how dependent I actually am on the people around me, I think that might be a good thing that comes out of this, that revelation of like how interdependent we really are, because if Woolworths runs out of food, then I don't have food. But we have this idea that we're independent, right? Like, okay, I do my job and I earn my money, and then I can go and buy whatever it is that I want to and pay for the services that I want, and the lights are on because I paid my bills, and all these sorts of things just kind of happen, and it's hidden because there's money in the space between us. So that I can just pay for the things and feel like I'm my own person, and I'm sturdy and I don't need anyone. I'm independent.
It's what we've been taught.
Right. Yeah, that's what you should strive for as well. But actually, it's so obvious when disaster strikes that that's not the case at all. And really, we're vulnerable, like to the nth degree. And I think part of the panic comes from that, like your mortality is often off in the distance, and then all of a sudden it's right here in your face, or your vulnerability, or whatever you want to think about it. Like we have all these things constructed around us to keep us safe, right? We're inside right now. But there's always a storm outside. It's just either far away or not. And when it's far away, it's a spectacle. It's like, wow, let's watch
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Nature's beautiful, right? And it is. And you can enjoy that spectacle from a distance. But then it comes a little bit closer, and when there's lightning striking in your neighborhood, now you're like, okay, this is a little bit scary. I'm really glad we have a house. And then, like in this example, then it's really like the roof's off the house and it's storming where you are. And even where we are, it's not happening. Like I don't know anyone who has coronavirus.
Yeah, I don't personally either.
Yeah, so it's like it's still not quite there, but if it's got to the point where it's been in Italy and those sorts of places, and maybe it will soon, then really the storm's inside and your vulnerability becomes so obvious, and all those layers get torn back. And I think that connects with what you're talking about in terms of having this kind of stable core that actually already knows that, right? That knows that you're vulnerable and that you're mortal, and is kind of okay with it, like to the degree that that's possible. It's like, oh, okay, there are things I can control, and there are many, 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 many more things that I can't control. And just knowing that already will make you more able to deal with a situation like this, where it seems like suddenly you're in control of almost nothing, right? And so I think in terms of there are meditation practices, and then also that kind of Stoic philosophy of we do what we can and then just deal with the fact that we can't control everything else.
We have to surrender to surrender to nature, because we're a part of it. It's not separate. And like as you mentioned, for example, we're interdependent, but we have this illusion that through our achievements, we like earning a lot of money, for example, we don't need each other. Right, and all you do is take away the money, or take away the source that the money can buy, and it's the deeper layer of what's wrong becomes exposed. It's nothing to do with the material objects, right? But on every level, what's being torn away is exposing the positives and the negatives.
Right.
What is like very blatantly, right? So you see on national levels, healthcare issues and social issues and economic issues, right? Like none of these are sustainable or designed to work properly. There's big, like the foundation is being ripped apart, and we're suffering from that. Maybe not you and I right now, maybe in a few weeks we will, we don't know that. And then on an individual level, which is, again, I feel all we can really do before we even connect with the community, right? Like, are you clean inside, and are you developing some abundance to then connect and share together, right? All of this is reflected back, and I think that's another terrifying part for a lot of people, is maybe they've not thought about that or seen that in a long time or even ever. And being faced with that is like, oh, maybe I've been living in a way that doesn't resonate with my values, or I am not, if I have an image of a higher self, I am very far from that. And how do I even face that, and where do I begin to change, right? And it's not to say that there's like good people and bad people, or being really self-critical is a great asset, but like, how do you make it constructive and positive, right? And I think we're doing that like every day as we figure out like, okay, what's the best course of action? What thoughts should I be having? What should I be reading? What should I be doing in action to help myself and the situation, and hopefully help others as well. So while there's, there's catastrophe and deaths, not just physical deaths, but many different type of deaths happening, this the pain and shakiness that comes from this is ripping open space for something else. And I feel that in some ways that was inevitable, right? If it wasn't the virus, it'd be something else. People were going on about global warming for a really long time, or global food crisis. And so this is just like really exposing and giving that very harsh opportunity for things to change, because there's no choice. And I feel that depending on what actions we do now and we will keep doing in the future, we can design a very, different, bright future, or we can also be broken by it. And both will probably happen, right? Like, let's say people are suffering economically and that will get worse, and that may make crime rise, right? And that's kind of a scary thing. So maybe you're in a safe neighborhood that's been safe for the last 80 years, and then that changes in the next year. And maybe, or a country without guns now has guns. Like, this is all stuff that could potentially happen. But I also feel that there's the equivalent, so like a yin and yang of a rise in consciousness, right? And this is what we're trying so hard to like scrape by and see, like, okay, I want to make a really positive future. How can I do that? What do I do?
Right.
Because it's always, even if it's not visible, the two sides exist, or maybe they take turns in different chapters. And I think it's so important to contemplate on that, and on an individual level, what can be done. But it would start with calming ourselves, right? Because if we are fearful, which is understandable because there's real threat, we cannot act, we cannot think clearly, and we cannot act out of compassion. It's not possible. So it's so understandable that you may run to the supermarket and take all the supplies you think you may need, because you think, I'm going to die if I don't do this, and I'm terrified. So how do we address that? It's not by saying, oh, these hoarders are idiots, and obviously there's better behavior that can be done, but what's causing it? And it's not just a couple of people, it's happening globally, right?
Yeah. And that information diet, that idea, because I'm the same as you. I recently joined up for a monthly newsletter, so I could stay and keep up with the news, because I just don't follow it at all. But obviously in this situation, there's some responsibility to be on top of what's happening. So if the Prime Minister announces, okay, gyms have to close, we have to close. There's no one at the door telling us to close, right? So I had to become more connected to what's going on. And it's been really awful, because when there's a news story that's not about the virus, it's about someone got stabbed or someone got in a car. It is really all negative, almost entirely. And I've just immediately noticed the effect on my physiology. I'm more stressed. And there is that, the addiction thing you mentioned. You get a dopamine hit when you get a new piece of information. Because as you kind of alluded to, it's a survival thing. If there's danger coming, then my body tells me, good news that you found out about the danger. And that's the dopamine
And there's
hit,
a surge of energy.
Yeah, right? And you get that oh, I better do something. And okay, I found out that there are suppliers over there, then I get a little dopamine hit. It's like a reward for finding that information out, right? Which is a surrogate for actually getting the suppliers. Because then next time I hear information, I get the little reward and I start seeking more and more. And that's happened with me, where I'm just at times where I would not be checking my phone, I'm just checking the news, and I'm checking my notifications, I'm checking my emails, and it's just but also it's spurred on a lot of action. Which has been, some of it's been really good. But I know it's not sustainable as well. So I've been trying to figure out what action is actually useful, and looking for that middle path, like you spoke about in the very beginning, between panicking on the one hand, and just like not doing anything on the other and assuming everything will be okay.
Yeah.
And so I think in terms of that pessimism versus optimism in response to what's happening, like if I just keep taking in the news, it's going to be pessimistic. Like I'm just going to have this things aren't going to work out kind of mentality. I can already feel it. But instead trying to approach things as a challenge. Like maybe we can talk a little bit about training and that kind of how that's affected, but then also in general, right? Like training is something we do where we're exposing ourselves to a challenge in the hopes that it'll make us stronger. And then like what happens when an actual challenge comes? Are you actually able to respond to the challenge and maybe get stronger? That burning off of the deadwood that brings out something positive, or
in case whichever friends are watching, if there's like people that don't actually know what we do, can you just like very briefly describe the training we do? Like why does it, prepare you for stress, or, because how does exercise help with that?
Right. Yeah. So basically you're making use of the fact that the body can become more resilient and can adapt to different stimuli. That's the core of training. You do something now, expose the body, or training mentally, expose the mind, expose anything to some small stressor at a particular dosage that will allow you to cope with a larger dosage later, just like a vaccination, which would be great. You get a little bit of the disease and then you respond and then you have some immunity to it, right? And so we do all sorts of things. We're doing strength training, mobility training, learning different skills, training in the mind, paying attention to how the mind can respond to challenges, and always in this small, relatively safe way that starts to build a more resilient structure and a more resilient being in general through this incremental exposure to stress. And so stresses are great when they're acute, right? So if I go outside and I'm cold for 10 minutes, then if I'm extremely cold, let's say for 5 minutes, then maybe next time I can endure that same amount of cold for 6 minutes. But if I'm extremely cold all night long, I die.
Yeah.
So that's too much. And that's the response that we're making use of. Is there anything that you would add to that? Because that's still too kind of vague.
I guess we'll find out from our watchers. I think our point is not so much to like describe in detail the training that we do, but we have gone online and the response has been really awesome, right? And you can feel from the students that it's not just because maybe they're frustrated, bored, lonely because they're stuck at home. There's something more there that provides them like a higher energy, a lightness. And I mean, like online now we're doing strength, mobility, handstands, meditation, longevity, movement, playing games in the house, tapping into that creativity, expressing, releasing stress, whether it's through exertion or meditating. I feel that it shows that there still is that community aspect, right? So people aren't just doing one-on-one sessions, they actually want to be together, and great discussions are coming after, where they can share how they're feeling or share their wisdom with one another. So like we also learn from them and we share with them and inspire them. Let's say, within the studio, an example I always pull out when I'm teaching the movement classes, when I show the coordination. So I show like a simple or complex pattern with my body moving arms, legs, to certain rhythm in music, and people need to copy it. That's kind of can be confronting, especially if it's new for them or they don't enjoy it. And I mention always, okay, so just have two things at the back of your mind, right? And this is stuff that's been taught to me by my own teachers, like Josef Rucek, for example, where while you are busy learning, acquiring a new skill, you observe what mechanisms you personally use to solve the problem, right? So you're seeing something that you can't do, and it's not because you don't have enough strength or you're not flexible enough. It's just moving your arms and legs in three-dimensional space, right? And so you see that, and the problem is you can see what's happening, but your body can't do it yet. So how do you find your own solution? Because the teacher is not giving you an answer, a solution. And that puts you in stress and trouble, and no one's helping you, right? So maybe like if we are in self-isolation, again, maybe you're not getting the help you wish. You, of course, wish for a vaccine. It doesn't exist, right?
Right.
So how do you cope? And panicking is going to slow you down only. It will take your energy and cloud you and delay your solution.
Well, panicking is not paying attention to how you're responding.
Yeah,
right?
you divert.
Like, complacency is not responding at all.
They're like siblings, right?
Right. Yeah.
Just like opposite personality.
You just kind of like fall over to this side and you're just doing nothing.
Yeah.
And you fall over to this side and you're just doing everything.
Yeah.
And finding that middle path and observing, like, oh, I have that tendency in myself to panic. Let's try to avoid that. And I have that tendency in myself to go like...
stick my head in the sand.
Yeah, and go like, no, I didn't plan for this, so it can't be happening.
Yes.
Until it really hits you in the face. Like, for example, a strategy that I've been using is just trying to be as generous as I can. And that sounds like, oh, great, good on you, man. Like, I'm not patting myself on the back because it just makes me feel much better. You know, there's this whole discussion around whether altruism actually really exists, or is it just a selfish act because you get that sort of same positive energy in response to being kind because it's evolutionarily useful, right? But that's like how can I respond to this, you know? And then also, so that's one thing, like if everyone was trying to be generous to the degree they could, that would make things better. And this is the more abstract, like if I just go emotionally, it's like if I can be generous, that seems to make me feel better. But then if I try to think a bit more abstractly and use this, like the Kantian categorical imperative, which says act in a way where if everyone acted in that way, that would be the kind of world you wanted to live in.
Which is what I like mentioned at the start.
Exactly. If I just isolate and everyone isolates, then good.
Yes.
Yeah. So I won't wait to be told exactly what I have to do. I'll like start doing those things and taking personal responsibility because those things ripple out.
Yeah.
And people go off, like we're leading a community here, so perhaps our behavior will have some sort of effect on that small sphere of people around us, right? And you said you've not been following the politics, but some of what upsets me about the political conversation that happens is that that's supposed to be coming from a leader, and that's not there. The actual leadership around like how we should be acting isn't there. And what people want from their leaders more than anything is clarity. Like, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to approach the situation and the problem. Clarity and honesty, right? And this is the reason that we have to do X, Y, or Z. Like we've been talking about there's been this controversy around you're allowed 5 people at a funeral, but you can have 10 people at an outdoor PT training session, which seems incoherent. The truth is that it's an economic issue, and if we were just communicated to honestly, and this comes back to what you're talking about, how things get exposed, like we don't have this habit of engaging in honest public dialogue with each other, and actually being real about, a great example is there's this idea that we're not going to close the schools down. And what our Prime Minister is saying is the reason is we need to make sure our kids get an education, which is not true. It's because if you close the schools, then all the parents have to go home to look after the kids, and then we really shut down the economy, right? Then no one can be at work in jobs no one can be working in jobs that can't be done from home. And if that was just communicated honestly, then maybe we would get more pockets of honesty and direct communication and clarity happening across the board. Like it ripples down or ripples out from that leader, which I think is something people get. I mean, I get really frustrated about it.
The stuff you share, I'm aware of, so I'm not that disconnected.
Yeah. I'm also, I think we're in the same boat, because like I'm only aware of it because of what's happening right now.
Yes. And yeah, like I observe disappointment in my, like, the feeling that comes up when I see this, right? Or things I just don't understand, and I start to kind of think, what the hell? Then I'm like, okay, you know what? It doesn't matter what I think. That's how it is, and it comes back to what can I do? But on my way here, I rode past on my bicycle a funeral, and there were 5 people,
right.
And yeah, it's like I felt for them, and I rode past 2 hairdressers that were open, and they were obviously a lot closer than 1 or 2 meters apart, because the hair was not super long, right? Or the arms weren't super long. And yeah, that's just
the scissors.
the scissors are like really long. So yeah, like, what can I do? I can kind of, first I'm baffled, and then I go, what the fuck? But then I kind of go, okay, well, I can laugh about it in a way, hope for the best, because that's not helping the situation at all. But it comes back to, like, what actions can I take, right? And how can I play my part? What kind of world do I want to see? Do I want to belong to? Because all these things, like you say, they're kind of just masking. It will be ripped apart. There's no way to mask these things, right? Whether it's economic or like the healthcare, like we can't get tested here, so it takes away the ability to trust or have faith in our so-called leaders,
right.
Because even for them, they weren't trained to handle this, right? This is extreme for everyone. So while I disagree and think, well, I wish we had someone a bit smarter or more compassionate, it's the same globally, more or less, right? Like, you don't learn how do you handle a catastrophe. I would hate to be the prime minister right now.
Yeah. But that's where I think honesty is so important. Like, don't just say we don't have enough test kits. Just tell us the truth. We're trying to get as many. There's this whole thing, if we want to suppress, like, public panic
and look better,
look like we're in control. I mean, it's like, actually, we know people, if they think about it for more than a few seconds, know that we're not in control. We're doing the best we can, and that the people who are in charge of making these decisions are also, like you say, just people who aren't trained. None of us are trained for this sort of a situation.
We don't know what to do.
But I think being honest and clear in those circumstances, and compassionate as well, like, that's the most important thing. So not putting out a press conference where it's just, okay, we're going to reassure everyone, and, like, finish by, like, smiling at the camera, like, we'll get through this in this bullshit way, but actually, like, hey, let's band together and let's get through this, and make that sort of public plea, if you will, to cooperate, not through threat, like, not through threats. And again, these problems get revealed, like, just as soon as there's a stressor put on the system, right? Like you mentioned the earthquake thing. It's like everything's shaking, and everyone's shaking as a consequence of it. But perhaps some people aren't, and it's the people who can acknowledge, okay, everything's shaking, but there's something sturdy.
And this pressure is also speeding up and forcing a rise in consciousness. I feel that's why we're having this humble conversation ourselves, right? Because we're like, we don't want that. That doesn't work. We know it, and we know where it's going to end up, and we're not going to be a part of that, although we don't really know what the next steps are.
Right.
And, unfortunately, we cannot count on or trust our leaders. We do get a certain amount of information that is helpful from them, right? Without that, we would really be clueless. But because, let's say for me, I personally don't trust that, even though there's not a lockdown, I am behaving as close as I can within like my ability to like run through daily life, to be in a semi-lockdown situation. Like I rode here, I didn't take the bus. Obviously, if there's a full-on lockdown, that's not really possible either. But I'm like, okay, what information did I get from all this stuff I read? I sieve away the negativity, and what is useful for me to take action. And then I take that. So I don't wait for the Prime Minister to say, this is open, that's closed, now you don't need to wash your hands, now wash your hands. Like, I kind of just have to take it into my own hands.
Right.
And that's all I can do. And I can't ask someone else to do the same, although I can suggest it. Right.
And you know what's amazing is how adaptable we are to those sorts of changes. Like all of a sudden when we came and saw each other, it's like, it's funny to see you.
Yeah, and are like live human
yeah,
beings.
like we've been talking through through Zoom all the time, but that's amazing. But also it scares me because I noticed the same with the bushfires when they were over. Like we had a week of rain, and then all of a sudden everyone was just like, well, back to normal. Like we could basically, unless you were directly affected by it, unless your house was burnt down or someone you were very close to, their house was burnt down, it was kind of over. Like but the climate change conversation is one that needs to continue, right? And like, we just have this thing of as soon as the thing is no longer immediate. On us right now. Okay, there's no action I can do, or we're great at planning for the future, like far better than all the other animals are. But
we have intellect.
Because we have intellect. But also, again, it's that scale thing, like 10,000 people have died. What's that really mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, my friend died. That means something.
Yes.
Right?
That changes everything.
It changes everything. And same thing with the fires. The fires are here. Okay, that's real right now, and it's tangible, and it's making me do something because there's that emotional impact. But then climate change will destroy the planet 50 years from now is even too abstract. Or 100 years from now. Maybe not destroy the planet, but have some serious impact on our lives. Yeah. And I worry that the same thing will happen here. Like, half of me worries and half of me thinks, we'll adapt. We'll actually adapt for the long term. Yes. Right? Because half of me worries that the pandemic ends and we lose all these lives in the process and all this dead wood's burnt off, and then we go, well, I'm glad that's over. And then the next pandemic's the same or worse. Because the next immediate thing comes to us.
Yeah. I feel that this is just the beginning, to be honest. And once the physical health issues subside, right? People have died, people have recovered. The aftermath is going to be huge, right? That's kind of inevitable. And again, it's not, and that's the reality, but for us to not jump back into that fear and panic boat is crucial because the boat's gonna sink, right? I think really recognizing that we are a part of nature, as is the virus, as were the bushfires. So a lot of stuff got burned down, a lot of animals died. But if you walk in the bush now, it looks lush. It's like Costa Rica. It's ridiculous. Right. And you're like, how did this happen in weeks after like months of like hundreds of thousands of acres of fire? And now it's regenerated like so quickly, right? Yeah. So this is, again, burning, destroying much of the world that we know. And the aftermath will also be very challenging, but there will be also this rebirth, this, young, strong seedlings, green and lush, coming out. And I think focusing on the facts is great, acknowledging, the heaviness of the situation, the reality, but seeing the positives as well, like little things within our community, people taking up meditation. Maybe they were only doing physical practice. And air pollution dropping down hugely, right? There's not many flights. So no one is talking climate change right now. It was screaming like 4 weeks ago, and I haven't heard a peep about that because we don't need that. That's being addressed. Nature's addressing that for us. It's like, you guys can't do your job. I'll do. I'm gonna throw some rocks at you, or whatever funny
it's
image
almost like an injury.
helps.
It's almost like an injury, right? Where you get these little bit of like pain, little bit of pain, little bit of pain, but you go, oh, that's the next day, it's fine. You go, oh, it's not a problem. It's not a problem. And then at some point, you actually get the injury, and that forces you to change whatever it was that caused the injury, because it's like, no, yeah, it's just forced change because the little messages weren't getting through.
Yeah.
And then you can just go,
core, right? It's not doing your physio rehab exercise. It's changing how
it's
you're
not just
walking
patching up the problem.
Together.
Exactly. And then there is that tendency to just go, it's just just bad luck that injury happened. It's just bad luck that we got struck by this virus. It's just bad luck those bushfires happened. It's just, and we'll just solve the problem.
The victim mode.
Right. Yeah. Woe is me that happened. But so I'm trying my best to adopt that more positive. What good could come from this mindset once you address the fact that it is real and that there are things that need to be done now to have less dead wood burnt off, or like less live wood burnt off, in the process, because some of that wood's really valuable. And then looking at what things can emerge that can be sustained once they've, for example, in my street, I got added to a WhatsApp group, which is just asking, hey, I'm going to the tip. Does anyone need me to take something for them? Or the local supermarket just got more supplies. Does anyone want me to drop something off? And like this, I didn't know any of my neighbors until now. It's a new neighborhood, but still it's like, and then different things like that have happened within our community of people offering to pay extra membership fees, or often offering to pay for someone else's membership fees. And maybe we would never have known that willingness to help was there without some serious challenge like this. So maybe we could end with like what you're hoping will come in 6, 12, 18 months from this. But, it can be general or specific, or like what would be an optimistic vision for, let's assume that we do all the things that we should, and evidence suggests that if we really properly socially isolate, hopefully there's some sort of lockdown soon, then we'll be able to have a huge effect on how many people die. Let's assume that all happens and then the virus is kind of dissipated. What would you hope would happen after that?
Well,
easy question, just
super easy. Just I would hope that all of us, this event will not be forgotten in our lifetime, right? It can be a bad memory or a great period of transformation. It'll be different for different people, but it's very powerful and important. So I would really hope that we have had those necessary deaths, all of us, not saying I hope your loved ones die, I mean internal, personal.
Like internal loved ones.
Like our bad habits, bad attitudes, negative thinking, things that are not helping each other, the environment, not helping ourselves. And like for me personally, it becomes a deeper spiritual practice. But each of us have our own different paths and what we're called to do and pull towards. But the change has to happen, right? I would hope that the community that we have is stronger, more vibrant, more connected and giving, and that alternative ways of living are coming up because they have to. The bigger infrastructures are not going to be able to support us, so we have to support each other. We are stronger together, right? We have such great wisdom, skill sets, kindness, creativity, and again, I quote from my teacher Joseph, diversity breeds immunity. We need immunity right now. We have diverse physical practices and seasonal foods to boost our current personal immunity as much as is available or possible. But together as a group, right, we have, people that are carpenters, people that are therapists, people that are thinkers and cleaners and, paramedics, all kinds of very wonderful, skilled people. And we need to really come together. It has to start individually, and then, like we said, like if you know someone in Argentina passed away, you feel it's unfortunate, but if your best friend passes away, that your whole world is changed. So it has to start here and then in the immediate circle, and that will spread, and it will actually, there's a potential for a global effect, right? And we need to be a part of that. So the lessons that are thrown at us right now should not just be like a reaction to get over this hump. It's to change everything for the longer run. Like how are we practicing? What kind of financial practices do we have? What kind of health practices? Can we count on the health system? No. So what solutions do we find? Let's put in our creativity. And do we go to like more ancient healing methods and combine that with modern science, and not so much just being passive and being helpless because of this illusion of independence and selfishness that is taught to us by the world. We can do so much better.
Yeah, and maybe the practices or the training or the planning that we do changes. Like training is something you do now for the sake of the future, right? Planning is something you do now for the sake of the future. You're predicting what the future will be like. And along with that adaptability we've already spoken about, we have this tendency as humans to assume the future will be like the present, but better. Or if you're a pessimist, it'll be like the present, but worse. But maybe actually because things are constantly changing and we're constantly being exposed to these sorts of challenges, and this is just a larger scale one, the planning or the training or the practices should always be preparing you for a future that you don't know, like a future that will be different from what you expect it to be. So that when that comes and that new novel challenge arises, actually you train for it without training specifically for it. And I think part of that is like it's a global problem that can be solved by severing all those global ties. Like we've slowly built up this culture that's more and more abstract, right? Like to the point of the internet where we're just connected through the ether and not connected with anything. Like we have this idea now in our culture that this is basically the dream of AI, is to upload consciousness and then we won't have to worry about our bodies. Like we won't have to worry about the fact that this will decay, right? Because I'll just be in the cloud. Like I'll just be somewhere else somehow. And that increasing abstraction and distance from what's immediate has consequences and is being addressed now because those ties are being cut and everything is having to become more local. So again, the dollar in between us gets taken away, and I find out, there's someone in my community that does this job.
You get to know your neighbors.
Right.
Something that was always normal.
And it turns out my neighbor has eggs, and I can get eggs from my neighbor rather than having to buy them from the shops, buy them from someone I don't know. These local connections get established. And this is what's been great for me, is seeing that at least for as many people it seems in our community who can afford it, that the money that they're paying for their membership isn't just a transaction for a service, right? Because many have said, I'll continue paying even though I'm not going to do the online classes. They're not getting anything out of it, but it's an exchange. Like money's not the devil, and it's an exchange of energy. I give you money if you give me something useful, but hopefully the fact that the money mediates our relationship doesn't make it just a transaction, right? We don't want it just to be transactional. I want to know that if I run out of money, which is happening to lots of people lose their jobs, if the money's not there, is there still a relationship, and is there still an interaction, and is there still an exchange of energy that's not mediated by the money? And maybe those relationships get reestablished. And whether money's there in the future or in between the people or not, there's like a clarity in, you're here providing this for me and thank you. And like, what can I do for you? Oh, you can do this for me. Yeah, great, let's exchange. And like I said earlier, we're always exchanging and we're always depending on each other. And Uber Eats just shows up at the door. And I know the guy's name because I saw it on the thing, right? But it's like everything just gets dropped at the door, and those relationships disappear.
Yeah.
But I think that could be one really positive thing that comes out of this, is the re-establishment of closer relationships. I'm excited to see, do we actually have a community? I'm always troubled by this question of, can you have a real community that's not premised on the need for survival, right? Because historically, we really needed each other, the people right near us, to protect us and to provide us with food. And I might get some food and you might get some food and we will share it. And I might get some today, you might get some tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
We really, really depend on each other.
But
can you create a community where that's like in the good times as well, and here's the bad time to see if you can?
And I feel that's kind of what we're starting here, right? People connect also out of joy, right? Not just, I need something, give it to me, but let's be joyful together. Let's share and elevate and uplift each other. And that's, again, the very light, positive side of seeing the same kind of interaction, right?
Yeah.
And exchanges or even needing something is fine. It's just that, is there a genuine connection? And is there an attachment to that material thing? Or is that just floating around? Like, not floating, but being passed around. So, again, it's like changing to this more abundant mindset where we, like, again, this unchanging core that we all have means that we are all actually the same. We're made from the same matter, right? When you strip away all these, like the body, the name, the stories, the status, we are actually all identical, right? So it's like, understanding and remembering this, and how much gratitude do we have right now that we don't have, well, I think we don't have the virus, fingers crossed, right? Like, oh, I wrote here, my lungs are feeling good. Do we take this for granted? Like 6 years later, we've, like, it's not forgotten, but it's like in the background. Do you realize how wonderful life is and how lucky we are, right, just to exist? Whether we're rich or poor or in great health or a little bit struggling, just having gratitude, like how that changes your life. You're not anymore like a poor me. I've shut the gym. I'm so bored training every day, or I have some health problems, or I've lost like half my money. There's not that victim mode, because you understand that you're just a small part of such a big, interconnected, dynamic thing, right? And having gratitude and connecting, to uplift each other and bringing joy. I think that's like shift the consciousness again. And probably if we had this chat like 4 days ago, I would have been in a darker place. I was still processing, like, okay, I got to get rid of this addiction of reading these articles and worrying about my family and myself, or I had like a runny nose, and I was like, oh my God, that's the first symptom, like all that like unnecessary stuff that comes up. So I don't know, I don't have too much more to say. I just want to like end on a positive. And right now we need resilience and strength for a marathon, right? So we can't like waste it on fear or negativity, even though they are present and they are real. I don't know if you have anything you want to add, or any tips for people, like whether it's training or not reading articles or reading more. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, if you've made it this far, then you deserve some tips. Right. I think like avoiding the news to the extent that you can.
Maybe like a certain quota, right?
Yeah.
Or like this looks useful.
Right. And maybe you pick the time of day that you get exposed to it, so it's not at night just before you go to sleep. Or in the morning as soon as you get up, or maybe it is, like depending on what effect it's going to have on you. Specific tips, I don't know, just paying attention and receiving the message. it's having an effect on all of our bodies, and like the anxiety is something you feel here, right? And that feeds into the thoughts.
Right.
But sometimes we forget that we just try to address the thoughts, and we get carried away with the thoughts and try to solve the problem up here.
Inside.
Yeah. But maybe it's just taking on a deep breathing practice, breathing deeply for a few minutes is enough to settle, or the opposite, like, maybe I just need to really go and move a lot. I need to go and run and like skip rope. Yeah, I got no space. Let me skip rope or just jump up and down on the spot for a while and like sweat some of that out and get things moving.
Play the drums.
Take the opportunity to be alone as well, and to pay attention to what that's like, and let that revelation, like the paring back that necessarily happens, lead to something good rather than to something bad. And if it's paring back all these things that you thought were you that turn out to be not useful in this situation, then maybe those parts of yourself, those parts of ourselves aren't useful in general. They're not serving us in general. Making the most of that when we get towards the other side of this, so that we can have that like reinvigorated version of ourselves come to be, version of ourselves and of each other, because we need each other, right? Like you feel it even though we can't, like the lack of touch. I feel bad for people who can't, I have a partner and we've like decided we'll get sick together.
I mean
and everyone's doing that, right? But not everyone has a partner, so not everyone's doing it, and those people are really struggling too. So let's remember that that the option for touch and reaching out and for connection is like something that's always there, and that we all need, because we're all the same, we're all equally mortal, right? Like death's a great equalizer. We're all equally vulnerable and exposed, and if we huddle together, that makes us stronger.
I guess I would like to add, I'm just thinking for people that are less fortunate than us, right? So I also have a partner, and he's stuck here with me. He doesn't normally live in Australia, so there's been complications, but also huge blessings from that. And I have that like physical comfort as well. But there would be maybe someone in an old home, and they're taking such strict precautions, maybe they cannot even leave the room, right? So then, or just anyone who's like, each one is in a different place. So how do you feel like you can be connected? And I think like something like, if you have fear, being able to talk about that with a friend is very important. There's no shame in being fearful, or even if you went and ended up hoarding out of that fear, like, express that, find a way to channel. Like, okay, I'm really, really scared, and it's okay to be scared. It's very scary, it's normal. And having like, someone listen and be there for you, or checking in on a friend, right? So another blessing is like, this business is like so far staying afloat, at least, if not okay, because in this era, the online world is amazing. I mean, I wish I worked for Zoom right now. I'd be pretty rich. But like, we have that opportunity. So we need physical distancing, not actual distancing. So I feel like, check in on a friend. Do you need resources? Do you need a virtual hug? Let them know you love them, and ask for help or company, right? I think that's also very important. It doesn't have to be terrifying and lonely. There's creative ways to address that. That was all I wanted to add.
Okay, great. Well, I think we leave it there. Hopefully something's clearer. I don't know if it is for me.
I enjoyed
for
the
you,
chat
but I think
very
it was,
much.
I think it was nice to catch up and chat.
Yes.
Hopefully anyone who's still listening thought that too. I don't think there's anything else to add, right? We can just wrap it up.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, and thank you, guys.